in last week's session based on my travels, and I couldn't make the session. So complete that today, and then obviously do theme 3 as well. So just want to share quickly. Okay, perfect. So we're going to start off with warehouse operations. Again, it's obviously it's going to go into different types of like what influences warehouse operations, what is the different flow of products that go through a warehouse specifically, what is inbound, what is outbound operations in a warehouse context, and then what is sorting, what is packing, what is dispatch. So basically the common terminology that's used when we speak about warehouse operations specifically. We're going to go into something called value-added logistics and cross-docking, which I'll explain a little bit more on. And then we're going to finish off in terms of how does e-commerce look from a warehousing management perspective. So that will basically conclude sort of like theme 1 and 2. And theme 3, we're going more into like the transport elements, different modes of transportation, the different scenarios when it comes to you know, how the modes operate, and the sort of like different ports, airports, etc., and what is the sort of explanations thereof for it. So I'm going to start off with sort of the evolution. So how did warehouse operations start? And I don't want to spend too much of time with it because it speaks a lot to what we had done when we spoke about normal operations and the evolution of it. But from a warehouse perspective, you can imagine that sort of like pre-industrial revolution, it started off very manual. So the warehouses were very labor intensive. Your goods were stored in a very simple warehouse setting or a very simple storage facility. And your inventory management specifically, it relied on you having to physically, manually count and record every single item that's sitting in your storage facility. So very like your layout, your organization is very rudimentary. It has a very little emphasis on being efficient, being, you know, cost effective or optimizing your facility. At that stage, you can imagine there is no technology around to help you when it comes to different sorts of cost optimization. So you have to rely on brains and manpower, basically. Then we go into a little bit more, which is sort of like late 19th century, which is mechanization. And that's where there was significant advancements when it comes to warehouse operations. So whether it means you bringing in industrial equipment to handle the type of product that you have, whether it's a truck or a crane, a hand crane, or a conveyor or a forklift. So it basically improved the efficiency of having material handling, of how you store your products, or even how you transport it between your different facilities when we're speaking warehousing. So you have a better productivity thereof. So mechanization was basically where you had an introduction of more mechanical equipment. Then it went into a sort of computerization stage, which came in sort of like late 20th century. And this is where you had sort of a widespread adoption of warehouse computer technology. Your warehouse management systems were adopted. You had like real-time inventory tracking with like your RFIDs or your barcoding or scanning integrity. And you sort of, it revolutionized inventory management, how you track it. You had better accuracy levels. You had more visibility into what you physically had stored in your warehouse. Then 21st century came automation and robotics. And I actually urge you to go and look at like YouTube videos of what automation and robotics look like. There's not many facilities in South Africa that physically have like that in-depth automation or robotics, but a company like GSV in South Africa, they at the Johannesburg facility, it's state of the art, next level. Everything is fully automated. DSV is a freight forwarder, courier company, etc. So they have invested a lot when it comes to automation, even robotics. So they try to specialize a lot more into healthcare, and you want to do as minimal handling as possible when it comes to pharmaceutical products, etc. So they've invested in that sort of thing. But if you go into more European countries like your Switzerland or your Germany, etc., you'll see that this is in an advanced stage when it comes to automation and robotics, especially in a warehouse system. They basically just need, it's like probably a two-man job to operate a 20,000 square meter facility because everything is so automated. So here you have like robotic picking systems, for instance. Instead of having someone to manually go and pick an item when you get an order from a customer, you have robots basically doing it. So the technology is over time, basically, it improves your efficiency, also your accuracy. So you have less labor costs, you have less cycle time. So anything to give you an optimization within your business is a huge thumbs up. Then you have e-commerce. So e-commerce as well as from an omni-channel perspective. So with e-commerce being so, on the top level right now, especially I think with people becoming a little bit more trustworthy when it comes to purchasing online, it's basically transformed warehouse operations. And, the other day, I'll tell you a bit of a story. The other day, I decided to go into a shopping mall. I was like, I feel like doing a little bit of retail therapy. Let me go in. It was a weekday. And as I said, the mall's not going to be so busy. I think I spent almost probably 3 hours at the shopping mall, shopping alone. And I came out with absolutely nothing. It's like nothing spoke to me, but I literally came home, I went online and I bought like 5 outfits. But it's like, that's how mindsets change. And I was the type of person where if I didn't physically see it or try it on, I'm never going to purchase it. And yeah, I think from an e-com perspective, the way businesses are going right now is they're making the reverse logistics of it that much easier. So if you purchase 5 items, for instance, they make it so easy for you to return those that you do not want, or make that refund process a lot better. So it's making people a lot more confident in purchasing online, which I think it's great. It's sort of like next level. So based on e-commerce fulfillment specifically, warehouses basically are now fulfilling a lot more smaller, more frequent orders. And the expectation from customers is they want a shorter delivery time. So if I order today, my expectation is I want it tomorrow. But the reality is I might get it in 2 days. But it is a lot more quicker transit time that courier companies specifically are now providing to e-commerce customers. Especially from an e-commerce perspective, a lot of businesses now, especially from a warehouse element, they're adopting new technology so that your order picking system becomes a lot more optimized. You have better sorting systems. So the way your bays are being sorted or your pallets are being sorted or your bins, everything is very strategically placed, where you probably have more frequent orders in the front, less frequent orders in the back, bigger items on top. So the way that everything's just being structured is a lot more different. People are being a lot more cleverer with the way they run their warehouse operations, whether it is a pure logistics company or you are an e-commerce customer that physically has a warehouse, and you're running that from an operations perspective. And then the last one is sustainability. When we speak about sustainability, we speak about green warehousing. So, now I think a lot of businesses are being very cognizant to the fact that environmental sustainability is a thing. People are now or businesses are now being audited or measured on it. So there's a big growing emphasis on green warehousing practices. So whether it means that warehouses are adopting more from an energy efficient perspective, whereas you have energy efficient lighting, you probably have a HVAC system that is more conducive to sustainability. And also probably if you're looking at an extension, the sort of building materials that you're using, you want to use the ones that reduce energy consumption, better the carbon footprint. So different types of initiatives like recycling, waste reduction, or maybe even like alternative energy solutions. Those are sort of what is becoming more prevalent in warehouse operations, and that's where a lot of warehouses are going. I know some customers, especially customers or businesses that are more green and sustainable, they look to partner with people that are green and sustainable. So they ask you the relevant questions, are you energy efficient? What is your strategies to reduce energy consumption? And based on the answers, and if it ticks the boxes, they would decide to go with you as a logistics provider. If you're not ticking all those boxes, they're going to find a service provider that is. So I think that's where you get a lot more businesses now that are looking to partner with somebody that is more sustainable than someone that's not. Okay. Then we're going to run into some of the factors that influence warehouse operations. So some of the sort of internal characteristics or internal factors, number one is inventory characteristics. So we're looking at what is like the type or the size of that specific inventory that directly impacts the warehouse operations. Is it something that is perishable? Is it pharmaceutical? What is the different storage and handling methods that is required compared to maybe a product that is more durable? I know in my organization, we have a customer that is on a medical side. So let's say it's Johnson & Johnson, for instance. A portion of Johnson & Johnson's pharmaceutical products needs to be at a temperature controlled element. So based on that, you have to have a cordoned off area that is temperature controlled, and these items are then stored in this warehouse facility. Some businesses or pharmaceutical companies actually require a pharmacist to be on site within your operation system, so that when you are dispatching or pulling items from a shelf, the pharmacist is there to double check that it is correct, how it is now stored, especially if you're carrying stuff like insulin, for instance. So these are the sort of internal sort of inventory characteristics that you're looking for. What is your warehouse sort of layout and design? So this affects your material flow. How are you from a picking perspective? How efficient are you? And how much of space are you then utilizing? So a lot of times what happens is if you have bigger customers, that is more, when I say bigger customers, I mean bulkier customers that warehouse from a bulk perspective, it tends to take up a lot more space. So how are you now storing this? Are you storing it on a floor? Because if you now store it on a floor, you can't put shelving in your warehouse facility. So you now need to determine the type of product or customer that you want in order for you to determine what your layout is going to be. So if half your warehouse is going to be floor space, the other half of it's going to be shelving, that is how you need to determine it, centered around your customer. What is the different technology that you require? Whether it is something that's from an automated perspective or a retrieval system, whether you have conveyor systems, anything that can, from a technology perspective, improve your efficiency, can be accurate, can give you a big enough throughput. That's what you can control. Your labor force, how skilled are they? What sort of training do they require? Maybe they require different training handling different types of products. And what is their productivity thereof? So a lot of times these sort of things from your warehouse staff, it influences your operational performance. So you need proper training. There needs to be proper labor management systems so that you can optimize your labor utilization. WMS, so warehouse management system, this includes anything from a inventory management, anything from order processing. So if you have a pretty robust WMS system, it provides real-time visibility. It allows you to be a lot more accurate, and it can streamline a lot of your workflow. So, you know, a lot of times what would happen if you have a proper warehouse management system, when you inbound, let's say you have a 20-foot container that arrives at a warehouse facility. When you inbound a 20-foot container, let's say it's filled with shoes, for instance. So different patterns, different styles, different sizes. Each one of them will have a different SKU based on the color, the pattern, the size. You would then offload it, you barcode and scan it, you put it into the bays that it's required to be in. Then you constantly, so every sort of scanning history, your inventory report or your storage report gets updated if you have a good WMS system. So for instance, if I get an order and it's 2 pairs of black lady sandals, size 5 and size 6, I then go to the picking station or where the product is kept. I scan the 2 pairs of shoes, and I bring it out. Automatically in the back end of your WMS system, it'll take out those 2 pairs of shoes as now stock is, you know, being taken out. So when your customer gets an updated spreadsheet, they will then say, okay, I now have 2 less stock on hand at 19:49 p.m., for instance. So this is how WMS systems help warehouse operations, and how it can benefit from an accuracy perspective, because you're not physically having to count each stock that's on your shelf. Everything is very automated from that respect. And then the last one is safety and compliance regulation, which is very important for warehouse operations. You need a very safe working environment to basically mitigate any sort of risk and any sort of liability. You know, if you're an ISO accreditation, whether it's, you know, from an environmental perspective or a sustainability perspective, you have to have certain degrees of liability covered. So, for instance, if you want to insure your entire warehouse for X amount, your insurance company will say, okay, I'll cover you. However, I need you to have a sprinkler above every single rack in your warehouse facility. It costs a lot of money, but it's something that you have to do. It's also from a safety and compliance perspective, what you have to adhere to in order for you to get an accreditation and to still get your insurance coverage. So these are the sort of different concepts that you need to understand in order to go forward. Then we have our external factors, which is customers' demand and sort of what their expectations are going to be. And this is completely from outside of a warehouse operation. Obviously, customers' demands go up and down, and it influences your warehouse. So there's a huge need for having to do an order fulfillment that's a lot faster, even customization. Like, for instance, my organization had gotten a contract with Distel few years ago, and we had to customize or kit basically a bottle of whiskey, 2 glasses, etc. So every time there was a different sort of seasonality or trend, Distel had jumped on board and had gotten us to do this. So it's so completely either from a season perspective, what your customer wants, or what different trends are going in the market. Then it's supplier performance. So the reliability and the performance of your suppliers impacts your inbound, and also impacts how you replenish your inventory. So you need your deliveries to be on time, which you get from your suppliers. You also need your suppliers to give you the correct shipments. And then there needs to be communication. So you don't want your supplier to just rock up at your door with a 20-foot or a 40-foot container and you're not prepared for it, because you have to get additional labor in for unpacking or offloading. So there has to be communication. Then we have transport. So different sort of transportation constraints. lead times, even your shipping costs, it affects your warehouse operation. So you need a good and efficient transport network. And also with location planning, it allows you to optimize where you're sitting at from an inbound perspective and an outbound perspective. Then we have regulatory environment, and this is any sort of trade policies or external regulations. This influences your warehouse ops. So whether it's international trade, whether it's customs compliances, you have to adhere to import and export regulations and also customs procedures to make sure that there's smooth operations. Then we have market competition, which is basically competitive pressure that's in the market. It forces warehouses to improve from an efficiency perspective, to reduce as much cost as possible. You want to be also more innovative, whether it's investing in different technologies or different processes in order for you to stay competitive and to stay relevant in the market. And the last one is economic conditions, which it is 100% an external factor. You have no control over what the inflation is going to be, or the interest rate is going to be, or even what your customer is going to spend. So any sort of economic downturn, it may lead to having a reduced demand or a reduced inventory level. And if you have a growth, then you may have expansion, or you may have more capacity. So yeah, it's always nice to understand where the internal externals are sitting. And this is where your SWOT analysis comes in, especially when you're a fully fledged organization. You want to understand what you can and can't control. Okay. Then we look at process flow, and I'm going to run through it because I can see we already got quite a bit to cover and not a lot of time. So process flow. So process flow is basically the flow of products through a warehouse, through these different stages. So the 5 stages that you see here, each of these stages are basically, the aim of it is to manage inventory as efficiently as possible. You want to fulfill your orders as efficiently as possible, and you want to achieve optimization by doing all of this. So typically this is the flow. The first one is receiving. So this is where you basically have all of your incoming shipments from suppliers. You unload it, you inspect it, you check it according to whether it's a bill of lading or a weighbill, etc. And you check it against your purchase order, meaning if you purchase 5 items, there needs to be 5 items in the box. So the products are then like sorted and labeled, and then you put it into your various storage locations according to their different characteristics. Then we have storage, which is, I think, self-explanatory, but your products are then stored at a specific storage area, whether it's a rack, whether it's a shelf, or whether it's just, on the floor, based on what sort of SKU they're sitting at. And your inventory sort of management system tracks the different locations, the different quantities, and the movement. So that will be like your WMS system. Order picking. So order picking is basically retrieving your product from your storage location so you can fulfill your customer's order. So there's various picking methods, whether it's batch picking, so where you will have 5 different orders, and you go and you pick it up in batches, or you have zone picking, where from that 5 orders, maybe all 5 of the orders have items sitting in zone 1, where the shoes are kept. So you'll pick from a zone, or whether it's wave picking, meaning you're just taking one order, you're running around the entire building, and you're coming back. So it's completely based on how that warehouse operations is designed and what works best for them. Then we have packing and shipping. So after you finish pick these items, your products are packed into whether it's boxes or pallets, and they're prepared to be outbound. So different packing methods, it may vary whether you have a fragile product, whether there's a specific shipping requirement. So if you are, for instance, carrying or shipping a product that is, let's say, a DGX, so dangerous goods, There's different labeling that needs to go onto the box. It needs to be packaged in a specific way. If it's, for instance, let's say you're deciding to fly fuel or oil, then that is complete DG. It needs to be like hazmat, so hazardous packaging done for it, whereas a professional company has to come through to your premises. They pack it in hazardous packaging, and you label it according to what the sort of MSDS says. So that's your material safety data sheet, just stating what type of product is contained within the box, and then you can ship it off. So that's where sort of from a packing and a shipping perspective it comes in. And then the last one is your returns process. So your returns process is basically you receiving, you inspecting, you restocking an item that has been returned from your customer. So your return item, depending on what type of business you are, you can restock it, you can refurbish it if it's a damaged product, or you can dispose of it if it can't be fixed. A lot of times, I know when it's from an FMCG perspective, I deal a lot with the FMCG companies. For instance, if you buy an Ola ice cream, and there's something massively wrong with this ice cream, you then can lay a complaint onto their website. They then have a customer services team, or a consumer team that will contact you. You then tell them what you've experienced with the product. They then contact, us as the logistics provider to go and collect the product. The product goes to their lab for testing to confirm that what you've said as a complaint is true. If it is true, they will either send you a new product, but almost 99% of the time they send you a voucher. So it's completely depending. So the return processes of different companies vary depending on what's your different products. Okay. Then we have inbound, outbound, and storage, okay, which is just our three little circles. And I'll run through what it is. So inbound operations, which I think we did touch on already. So inbound operation is basically accepting your incoming shipments from your customers, checking it, inspecting it, that sort of thing, unloading, sorting, and then putting it away. Storage, okay, which is the center one. It is basically having a WMS system, putting it into the required bays, and having a space utilization, meaning that you want to maximize the space, so you optimize your layout according to the type of product and the volumes of inventory that you have, whether it's rack configuration, vertical storage solutions, etc. And then the last one is outbound storage, which is order picking, etc. So all of those 5 steps basically put into 3 different steps, which is inbound, outbound storage. Okay. Then we have value-added logistics. So value-added logistics is basically activities and any type of services that enhance the value of products as they move through the supply chain, for instance. So it can go beyond just you having a move my parcel from point A to point B and just store my product in a specific warehouse. It has various other things, like customization, labeling, packaging, etc. And this is quite a common question that may pop up. I know it did pop up in one of the assessments last year. More so the examination. So remember this type of thing so you know what value-added logistics are, because everyone is so far over the traditional logistics that they want to know what else can I give you. When I go out and sell logistics, I sell value-added logistics. I don't sell, I can take your parcel and move it from Johannesburg to Cape Town. Is how can I impact your cash flow, or increase your cash flow, impact your balance sheet, how can I change your business? That's where value-added logistics come into play. So I'll run through it, but the first one is customization, which is basically having a personalization of a product to meet a customer's requirements. You want to have a tailored service to the customer, where they can differentiate themselves in the market. So something like, and I'll touch with packaging and customization. So something like Yappy Chef, for instance. So Yappy Chef has, if you order from Yappy Chef, and it's a smaller item that doesn't go into a box, it will come in a flyer bag. All of Yappy Chef's flyer bags are pink, bright pink. You're never going to miss that. Imagine those bright pink flyer bags sitting in a reception area of a big corporate, company where people are walking up and down. Hey, what's that pink bag? It catches people's attention, and then now you wanting to walk across and go and read the label or read what's on that little flyer bag, and then it urges you to now go and Google what is Yappy Chef. So this is where customization and personalization comes into play. Then we have product assembly. So this is where you basically have different sort of components or parts combined into a finished good according to what the customer's specification is. So whether it is like the Distal example I gave you, the core business of a logistics company is to move a parcel from point A to B. It is not assembly or product assembly or component assembly, but you're offering that as a value-added logistics service. Packaging and labeling, which I think I spoke about from a packaging perspective, but even labeling. There was times where I, had gotten a design for a specific label for a customer. And when I say label, it may just be a label, but it's something that's big, bright, and bold that can be seen anywhere. Or it's personalized tape that goes over their boxes, over a brown box or a white box, which also draws people's attention. Then we have kitting. So whether it's, a bundle pack or a value-added offering for a customer, or even a complementary product. So if a customer has to order product A from you, they're getting a free dust bag, for instance, or getting a free, can of paint, depending on what your product is. It's all different complementary products that you now want to kit together. I know if you order online with Future Life, for instance, if you order a whole host of different products from them, you get little pouches or different sachets of free, sets that go in there for you to try new flavors or new, recipes that they've tried out. So you can now kit this as a logistics, company for them. Then we have quality control, which is basically an inspection process where you would ensure that your products meet the quality standards. You want to do quality checks beforehand, so you can address any sort of defects and any sort of issues, etc., so that you have brand credibility at the end of the day. And then reverse logistics is your after-sales support, any sort of returns from a product, repairs, refurbishments, all of that. Okay, then we move on to cross-docking. So what is cross-docking? So this is more so you use from a freight perspective. So whether it's a sea freight, sea freight side, but cross-docking is basically a logistics strategy that involves you unloading your product from your truck and loading them directly onto another truck that's going out to deliver. So there's basically no storage element in between. You're offloading it from one truck and you're loading it onto another truck. So let's say, for instance, you have a 20-foot container that is arriving at Durban Port, and the shipment needs to be in Johannesburg. You have a truck sitting at Durban Port to collect your 20-foot container. It comes back to the facility. It offloads that specific container either onto the floor or onto the other truck. So it may be a minimal to no storage, but when I say minimal, it's like a few hours, probably a day at most. So there is probably no storage cost depending on the type of customer that you are. So a lot of customers, like, for instance, from an FMCG perspective, when you are doing sea freight, if they are getting a 20-foot container in, their requirement is that you pack their products according to what their specification is from their warehouse facility. So if we're delivering it to their warehouse, they want it packed accordingly. So let's say it's 10 high on a pallet and then shrink wrapped. That's how it needs to be packaged. So we would come, offload it, repack it. So from a cross-docking perspective, and then send it out. So some of the main ideas when we talk about cross-docking is you want to improve your supply chain efficiency as much as possible, and you want to reduce your cost. Also, it has a huge customer service element to it. Customers want a cross-docking facility. A lot of businesses don't have the space and the manpower to have cross-docking, but if you're full on a freight forwarder, you will most probably have that facility available. So number one is you can reduce your inventory holding costs because you're now not needing to actually store the inventory in a specific warehouse. You can do faster order fulfillment because you're basically eliminating the delays with storing, retrieving, that sort of thing. So your products are received, they're sorted, they're shipped out to a customer in a shorter lead time, which is great because you have better customer satisfaction at the end. Then you have an improved supply chain. So your supply chain ends up being a lot more efficient because you're reducing handling and processing time. You're minimizing some of your transportation distances as well as your costs, because a lot of times what happens is there tends to be standing time with your transportation companies. So you're now reducing a big element from that. And also you don't have a storage cost. So everything is a lot more streamlined from an operations perspective. You have better cycle times and just overall supply chain performance that's improved. Then you have enhanced transportation optimization. So basically with consolidation of shipments from your suppliers to your customers in a timely fashion, it allows for better, sorry, I just lost my train of thought. It allows for better reducing the number of stops, reduces the number of handling, different points. You can minimize your transportation costs. You can reduce fuel consumption and also save the environment, from a sustainability, environmentally friendly, carbon emission reduction, all of these just contributing towards sustainability. Then we have just-in-time, which is JIT. So cross-docking actually supports JIT systems because it allows for a good transfer of product from a supplier to a customer in a timely manner. You know what just-in-time is, where you basically receive a component, a part, or a finished product just in time for it to be, processed together or parted together in order for it to be shipped out. Flexibility, and also from an adaptability perspective, you're now responding to very dynamic sort of market changes or season demand fluctuations, etc. So it allows businesses to quickly adjust to shipping schedules. You can prioritize your orders a lot better, meet your customers' demand. And then lastly, you can cost save as much as possible because you now have an improved operational efficiency. So I hope that gave you, if you didn't know what cross-docking is, I hope you now know what cross-docking is. Okay, and then lastly, just from this portion, is understanding the role of e-commerce in warehouse management. Because we all know e-commerce has basically transformed the way businesses work, where they handle their inventory, fulfill their orders, manage their supply chain. And one business may have multiple supply chain. They may have a brick and mortar, they may have an e-commerce. Those are different channels of supply chain. So when we look at it, we look at from a, an inventory management perspective, where from an e-commerce side, they introduce a lot newer challenges for inventory management because you now have a larger number of SKUs because e-commerce customers tend to put everything on their website. So, and you're also handling a lot smaller sort of order sizes and also dealing with fluctuating demand patterns. Your customer may order today, may not order the next month, etc. So your WMS needs to be as robust as possible so you can handle a lot of these complexities and still have visibility to your system. It also needs faster order fulfillment so that you can meet your customers' expectations, which I think we touched on before as well. A multi-channel distribution. It does support it because you're now fulfilling orders through various different sales channels, whether it is, let's say, Take-A-Lot or marketplaces or your own website. Maybe it's a mobile app, maybe it's emails or telephonic. So it's all different multi-channel distribution sites that customers are placing orders from. So you need a good operation system to be able to manage this so you're not missing any sort of orders. Seasonal demand, or whether it's promotional demand, it can be very fluctuating based on seasons, based on trends, based on different events that's happening. So the sort of warehousing systems need to be quite flexible to handle spikes in volumes, adjust your staffing level, so to be a lot more scalable. And when it dies down, to then scale it back down. Reverse logistics, basically to look at it from a product return perspective and necessitate any sort of efficient reverse logistics process. Whether it's something that's completely automated or whether it's something where you have to call into a call center, get an order number, they send out a courier to you, or it may be a sort of click and collect option, click and drop off option, where you would do a return, they will tell you to drop it off at your closest postnet, for instance, or your closest Pudo locker, whatever it might be, but anything that is more like a store location. A lot of businesses are going that way. Integration with technology, it's a lot of times e-commerce warehouses, they leverage technology in order for them to optimize their operations, improve the efficiency. They use a lot of WMS systems, with barcoding, scanning, automation, that sort of thing. And then the last one is customer expectations. So e-commerce has basically raised customers' expectation because they want fast, more accurate, reliable sort of like order fulfillment. So warehouses play a very crucial role in meeting those expectations because they need to ensure on-time delivery and a good product quality at the end of the day because it is their reputation at hand. Okay, is there any question so far when we speak about warehouse operations? Okay, I'm going to touch on a little bit with our different modes of transport. We do have 15 minutes left, so I can quickly run through that part. Okay. And all right. Okay. So our theme 3 speaks directly through to distribution networks, different modes of transport, as I mentioned. So a distribution network design specifically is determining basically the best configuration for a physical infrastructure, which facilitates the movement of goods from a production perspective right down to who your customer is, whether it's location in terms of your storage or your warehousing specifically, where is the point of distribution for you? And what is that size or that location or that layout that you require? You can either do this in-house, meaning you would fully in-sourced, where you would fully be liable for it, or you could outsource it to a logistics company that specializes in being a distribution center. So some of the key topics there, which I'm not going to go too much into detail, is number one is location. What is the proximity to either your top suppliers or to your biggest or your highest spending customers, or your highest, distribution of customers? Is it close to ports, highways, etc., which we have spoken about in previous learning units? What is the facility size that you need? What is the sort of forecasted demand that you're anticipating? What is the inventory levels you are deciding on holding? And what is your throughput rate that you're looking at? This is how you're going to decide on a facility size. Inventory management. So this is basically balancing the trade-off between inventory costs and what your service level is going to be. So deciding on the appropriate levels of like safety stock and replenishment strategy. So that's what you need to look at when you're looking at inventory management. You don't want to be understocked, nor do you want to be overstocked. Transport optimization, you want to have the most efficient transportation route. And which mode are you using? Is it air, sea, road, rail, pipeline? How best do you now minimize your costs, but maximizing your service level? So you want to pay less and you want it there quicker. So you want to choose a location where, let's say, for instance, you have 50% of your main customers sitting in Cape Town. The best option is having a facility in Cape Town. Whether it's a centralized facility or a decentralized facility, it's faster to market and it's cheaper because you don't have a line haul in between. You directly from the facility or distribution center directly through to your customer. Technology integration. What is the WMS system, the different transport management systems that you need, which is great. I mean, transport management systems, which I'll touch on when we go through the modes, it optimizes your operations. You're able to have a lot more visibility throughout the entire logistics and supply chain process. And then the last one is risk management. You want to be able to know what the risks are and how best you can mitigate those risks, whether it is a disruption in your supply chain. Maybe your ship was delayed by 10 days. How do you now manage this? Different natural disasters that happen. So these are the sort of different sort of key elements and different sort of considerations to look at when you're thinking about a distribution network design. Okay, then we talk about interconnected components of distribution centers. So interconnected components basically facilitate the flow of goods through the distribution network. So these are sort of how it's connected. It's going to be obviously a lot more repetition, but the first one is your warehouse, whether it's raw material storage or work in progress or finished good, or whether it's just a cross-docking facility. This is one of your interconnected components. Transport is how you're going to move your goods. Order fulfillment is processes for how you're going to receive, you're going to process, you're going to fulfill, and you're going to basically ship it, package it, and ship it out. Inventory management is your different processes. How do you now track your inventory level? Information system is completely from a tech perspective. How you're going to capture, how you're going to share sort of the data across the different distribution networks so that you have better visibility. And the last one is your reverse logistics. What is the process for managing returns, repairs, recycling, etc. Okay, then you have the different types of distribution channels. So there's 3 different types of distribution channels, and your distribution channel specifically is the different pathways through which your products move from your manufacturer stage right down to your end customer stage. So the different channels, it'll vary significantly, either it being from a complexity perspective, the amount of time it takes, or just the number of different stakeholders that's involved in the channel itself. So the first one is a direct distribution channel, and this is direct integration or interaction between your manufacturer and your customer. There's no intermediaries involved at all between the person who manufactures it to the person that basically buys it, who is the final end customer. So your manufacturer retains full control over the marketing, the sales, the distribution processes, etc. So an example of this is an e-commerce website. Like I use Yappy Chef as an example. So Yappy Chef, they are a direct distribution channel. They do online sales through their own company's website, or it's a manufacturing owned retail store. Like for instance, Songa. Songa is a shoe brand, South African shoe brand. They manufacture the product and they sell directly through to customers. An indirect distribution channel basically has one or more intermediaries between the manufacturer and the end customer. So your intermediary here may be either a wholesaler, a distributor, or a retailer, or even selling it to an agent who sells it to an end customer. So an example of this will be like a distributor selling it to an independent retailer, like AMC, for instance, like the pots, or like Tupperware, for instance, is sold to an agent, the agent then sells it to a customer. Hybrid distribution channel, you can imagine it is a combination of both direct and indirect distribution channels. So your manufacturer basically utilizes a mix of direct and indirect channels so that it reaches different customer segments or different geographical markets. Like for instance, if you have like an online sales company, they sell directly through their website, as well as they sell through Takealot. So that would be a hybrid distribution channel. Okay, so I hope you can get the drift of the different distribution channels and how it would work. Then we have the modes of transportation, and I'll shoot through this because I'm pretty sure you have an understanding of these different modes. So the first one is road. Obviously, from a road perspective, there's a lot more flexibility because you have roads reach basically most areas, whether it's a remote location or it's not accessible to other modes. It also provides a door-to-door service. It's a lot quicker. It's a lot more cost-effective than the other modes. Some of the limitations would be, traffic congestion. It can cause a little bit of a delay. Also, from a weather dependency perspective, and also a truck can only carry so much. So if you've got a 4-tonner, for instance, it can only carry that number of that weight of product. It cannot go more than that. So those are sort of where the limitations are sitting. Then we have air transport, which we know is quite fast. So from a speed perspective, probably the fastest mode of transportation. It gives you a lot more from a global connectivity. So the air route obviously covers every corner of the globe. It's a lot more reliable because airlines try their best to stick to very strict schedules. Also, they have a reduced inventory cost because they have shorter transit times, so they don't need a lot of, storage space and large buffer spaces, etc. Then we have rail, which is not very well used in South Africa, but it's a lot more cost effective. So last year I had the privilege of going to Transnet Rail in Centurion for a little site visit, and the rail facility in South Africa is used predominantly from that perspective in the automotive and OEM industry, so where they are basically tracking cars on railways. And then from a rich space side, they're using a lot of it from a product perspective. So whether it's iron ore, they're using the rail facility for that. So it is kind of being used. It's probably one of the most cost-effective modes, but it can only go to so many places. So there is a bit of a limited accessibility there. Maritime, we know, is ships. So from a maritime perspective, also a lot more cost effective when we're looking at bulk and you're looking at from a long distance, it's more efficient. But the problem is it can be a lot longer from a transit perspective. And then the last one is pipeline. So pipelines are cost effective, especially when we're looking at different products like liquids and gases over a long distance perspective. It's also a lot more safer to transport than using other modes of transport, but it's very limited, meaning that it can only be used for those type of products. It's not suitable for all types of cargo. There's also a very high initial investment, so not everybody has the pipelines basically available and open and ready to move. Okay. And then these are different stations and ports. So you can see directly from here, you know, a train station, a seaport, and then an airport. And that's just to give you more of an underlying idea of what it looks like. And then I think this is our last one. So this is inbound and outbound distribution. So basically, there's two distinct phases of the supply chain, and each basically involves the movement of goods in different directions and for different purposes. So we want to look at it from a inbound distribution perspective. So you want to look at the direction or the movement. So when we're talking inbound, it means movement of goods from your supplier or your manufacturer, bringing in sort of like raw material or components or probably like any sort of like semi-finished product, and putting it into like a production process. And then when we look at it from an outbound perspective, it means moving your finished product from a manufacturer to a final or end customer. Okay, so this is delivering your final product to the different like distribution points that it needs to be done for sale. Okay, so inbound distribution, one of the purposes there is it basically you want a very timely flow of materials that's needed for production. So the raw materials that I spoke about, or the semi-finished product, it basically supports your operations from a manufacturing perspective. And you can then maintain sort of optimal inventory levels. You want to have as minimal stockouts as possible, and make sure that you have the right materials available at all times. And then from an outbound perspective, you want to deliver your finished products to your customer. And basically, it's anything that has to do with order processing, picking, packing, sub-assembly, kitting, shipping, all of that is what outbound distribution basically looks at. So yeah, I think when you look at it from an inbound and an outbound perspective and a distribution specifically, it's basically your movement of goods, but it differs whether it means the direction, okay, whether it's either raw material or the finished good, and is it coming from a manufacturer, is it, you know, going to a customer? What is their purpose? What do they then focus on? And sort of how do you then put sort of KPIs in place for them? Your inbound distribution, your focus is bringing your materials into support manufacturing. Your outbound, focusing on delivering your finished product to your customer so you can meet your customer's demand. And you need both the processes to be as efficient as possible so you can have supply chain efficiency, you can have the high performance supply chain that you want, and also you have customer satisfaction at the end. Okay. Is there any questions for me? Okay. I have already shared your ICE task 3. You'll see it online. I have made that due date for not next week, Thursday. It's the week after. I can't remember the date. I think it's the 26th, if I'm not mistaken. So you do have 2 weeks basically to work on that ICE task. And then the next one after that, I think, is due on the 8th of May. So I will give you a little bit of time with that one as well, because we do have quite a bit of time before our last lecture. So I would like to at least finish the ICE task at least 2 weeks before our last lecture, so we can use the last lecture or the last 2 lectures to basically run through any revision. I will have past papers, so I'm going to do a lot of cases with you, just so we can cover more of the sort of theories and content that we may have missed, that is now sitting in your examination, or possibly could be sitting in your examination. Okay, you guys have a lovely weekend, or Thursday and weekend, and I'll chat to you next week again. Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Thanks, Narissa. You too. Bye.
Bye.